Have you ever thought about how much money really shapes the political game? I mean, it's not just about donations to campaigns, right? Sometimes it's way more direct, and that really gets you thinking about how fair our elections really are.
Yeah, it definitely raises some big questions about fairness, and the whole idea of democracy working the way it should. When you see a lot of wealth coming into politics, especially in new ways, you have to really look at what that means for everyone.
Right, exactly. And that's actually what we're going to be looking at today, right? We're diving deep into Elon Musk and what he did in that Wisconsin Supreme Court election back in March of 25. But we're not just going over those headlines again about the $1 million payments and all that. We want to go deeper and figure out, what the long-term effects could be from stuff like this.
Exactly, yeah. We've got all your sources right here. And they go into detail about, not just the money involved, but also the specific incentives that they were offering voters, right? And then all the legal challenges that happened afterward. So what we're going to do is kind of connect all those dots and see what it all means in the bigger picture, especially what it tells us about the current laws and how they work or don't work, as the case may be.
Okay, sounds good. So let's jump right into it with Source 4. This is where the legal battle really gets interesting, right? It's all about Musk's $1 million payments to voters in Wisconsin. So what was the main legal argument against those payments?
Well, the heart of it was Wisconsin state laws about bribery, right? And those laws are pretty clear. You can't offer someone something of value, like money, if you're doing it to try to get them to vote a certain way. Yeah. It's actually considered a felony in Wisconsin. So, when Musk first came out with this whole thing about the payments, Wisconsin's Attorney General Josh Kaul, he filed that emergency lawsuit right away saying it was totally illegal.
Right, yeah. At first glance, it seems pretty straightforward, right? You just can't pay people to vote how you want them to. But then Musk kind of changed his approach, right? Didn't he come up with some new terms for those payments?
He did, yeah. He got that legal pushback right away, so he revised the offer. Yeah. He said the payments were now for people to become, get this, spokespeople for a petition. And that petition was all about, opposing these judges that he called, quote unquote, activist judges. So basically, he was trying to make it look like he was paying them to speak out about this issue, instead of just straight up buying their vote.
Okay. So he's saying it was more about supporting free speech, political speech, rather than just buying votes. Because, they were going to be speaking out for a specific cause.
Exactly. His whole defense was basically saying, hey, I'm just paying people to express their political opinions, and you can't take that away. That's the First Amendment. He was comparing it to funding a campaign or an awareness campaign, totally different from paying someone directly to vote. That's what he was arguing.
Got it. And so this is where the legal experts really started to weigh in, right? And it sounds like they had some pretty different opinions about whether this, this new approach actually held up legally.
Oh, absolutely. Source 4 talks about some of these experts, like Brenna Godard. She's from the University of Wisconsin Law School. And she said, even with the changes he made, the original idea, to sway the election could still make the whole thing illegal. It's about whether changing what he called it really changed why he was doing it.
Right. So it doesn't matter what you call it. It's what was the real intention behind it. Right?
Exactly. And then there's another important thing to remember here that the source points out. Federal laws against buying votes, those only apply to federal elections. So in this case, it was really Wisconsin's own state laws that were at the center of it all.
Got it. Okay. So when this whole thing went to court, did they agree with the Attorney General's initial take on it, or did they see Musk's revised argument, in a different light?
Well, it's interesting because the lower courts actually ended up siding with Musk. They believed his argument that the payments, especially with the changes he made, fell under the protection of free speech, under the First Amendment. However, when the Attorney General, Kaul, tried to take it to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, they declined to get involved. Now, it's super important to understand that doesn't mean they agreed with Musk or that it settled the legal questions. It just means they chose not to take on the case at that point. So the legal questions are kind of still hanging out there, No real answer at the highest level in the state.
Okay, so the payments were allowed to go ahead, but the whole legal debate definitely didn't stop there, right? Legal scholars and ethics experts were still chiming in, and it seems like there was a real division in their opinions.
Exactly. Yeah, it was kind of split down the middle. You had folks like Richard Hassan, a big legal scholar from UCLA, and a bunch of government ethics experts. They were saying that even with the new wording, Musk was either right on the edge of breaking the law or straight up breaking it. Their point was, no matter how you dress it up, offering that much money is connected to trying to influence the election.
Right, right. It's hard to argue that it's not like swaying people, when you're offering that much money.
Yeah, exactly. But then you have people like Brad Smith. He used to be a chair of the FEC, and he said that technically the payments were for the petition. So Musk was finding a loophole, basically, by paying for advocacy, which is treated differently legally than paying for a vote.
Wow, so it sounds like they were really walking a fine line, right? And the fact that even the experts can't agree just shows how unclear the law is in these kinds of situations. It makes you wonder, if our laws are even ready to handle these new ways that people are trying to influence politics. Like, it's not just about one election. It's about whether the rules we have can actually stop wealthy people from having way too much power. Right?
Yeah. You've hit on a really important point there. This case shows how much tension there is between, on one hand, our right to free speech, to speak up about political stuff, and on the other hand, the need to stop corruption and make sure elections are fair. Where's the line between getting people involved in politics the right way and trying to, buy their vote? That's the question that Musk's actions are making everyone face.
It's a tough one. And it sounds like this wasn't even the first time that Musk used this kind of strategy, right? Source 4 mentioned some other examples.
You're right, yeah. He says that he had similar programs, offering incentives to voters during the 2024 elections in a few swing states. Those also caused some legal trouble, but they weren't blocked by the courts back then. So, it does seem like he's been trying this out for a while, using money to get involved in elections.
Interesting. And are there any legal consequences still hanging around from those earlier programs? Are they still dealing with that stuff?
It's funny you should ask that. Source 4 mentions that there are actually lawsuits from those 2024 programs that are still going on. So while he's been able to do it so far, it doesn't mean it's all settled. The Wisconsin case is just one more piece of a really complex puzzle. And it's totally possible that the courts will have to take another look at Wisconsin's bribery laws and, really figure out what they mean because of all this.
Okay, so it's not just a one-time thing in Wisconsin. It's like a bigger pattern, and we don't even know yet how it's all going to play out legally, right? So let's zoom out a bit. Beyond this one election, what are some of the bigger implications if this kind of stuff keeps happening?
Well, this whole situation really shines a light on a big problem we have, right? We talked about First Amendment rights, the right to free speech and all that. But then we also have laws to stop people from buying votes and to keep our elections fair, like the basic idea of democracy. And those two things are kind of bumping into each other here. It's forcing us to ask, where do you draw the line? When does encouraging people to be politically active turn into, improperly messing with how people vote? And, Musk isn't the only one doing this kind of thing.
Right. It makes you think, if this becomes the norm, what's going to happen to elections in the future? Could we end up in a place where only super rich people have the power to decide who wins?
That's the big worry, isn't it? If this keeps happening, where people use money to influence votes and they find ways to make it, seem legal, it could totally change the balance of power. It makes you wonder, if people without a ton of money will even have a real chance to participate in politics anymore. Can they even compete if this is how the game is played?
And Source 3 gets into what might happen if they actually win those legal challenges against this stuff. It talks about how election results could be thrown out, if courts decide these payments were illegal after all. Imagine that chaos.
Oh, yeah, it's a scary thought. If the courts were to say that these tactics are illegal, yeah, it would definitely open the door for people to challenge election results where this kind of stuff happened. That could make things really unstable in our system. I mean, think about it. An election being challenged years later because of how they got people to vote. It makes you wonder, what does a fair election even mean anymore, in this day and age? These aren't just theoretical legal arguments. This stuff has real world consequences for our democracy, for how our whole system works.
Yeah, for sure. And all this legal confusion we've been talking about with the experts all disagreeing and stuff, it seems like that just makes it more likely that there will be even more legal battles in the future. If the rules aren't clear, people are going to keep fighting about them, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. When there's no clear agreement on what's legal and what's not, you're going to see more of these challenges, more lawsuits, more confusion. And that's going to make elections even more complicated, maybe even lead to periods where, we're not even sure who won for a long time. It's a mess waiting to happen.
Okay, so we've really gotten into the details of Source 4, all the legal arguments and everything. And it's clear that this Wisconsin situation is about way more than just one election in one state, right?
Right. I mean, it's a perfect example of how campaign finance laws are changing, and how our whole society is trying to figure out how much influence money should have in politics. It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. We have to think about free speech, but also about keeping our elections fair.
So, to wrap up what we've learned from Source 4 today, the big takeaway is that there are serious legal questions, potentially huge implications, because of what Elon Musk did with those voter payments in Wisconsin. It's not just about the money itself, but what it means for the very idea of fair and open elections, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This whole thing shows how tricky it is to balance our right to express ourselves politically with the need to protect our elections and make sure they're fair.
Okay, so here's something for you to think about. Given all this legal back and forth and the chance that these tactics could actually change who wins elections, what responsibility do rich people have, when they get involved in politics in these new ways? And what can we do to make sure that everyone has a fair shot, whether they're rich or not? It's a question worth thinking about for sure. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.